It's officially the end of the road for the 2024 NBA season as we've arrived at the NBA Finals where the Boston Celtics and the Dallas Mavericks will be battling it out for the title. The other 28 teams are all at home thinking about what needs to be done to get themselves into that position, which brings us to today's video. No team is perfect, every group makes a mistake at some point every year, some just have bigger regrets than others. But in today's video, and in my next video, I will be running through every NBA team, picking out their biggest regret of the 2024 season. In this video, I will be going through the teams in the Eastern Conference, then in my next video I'll finish things off by going through the teams in the Western Conference, so stay tuned for that as well. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I'd also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. Going in alphabetical order, we'll start with the Atlanta Hawks, and their biggest regret of the season is drafting Kobe Buffkin 15th overall. There were definitely a few things that could have been the choice for the Hawks, but the expectation is that a few of them will be handled this upcoming offseason, so in hindsight, whiffing on Buffkin in the middle of the first round, knowing that there were several quality young guys selected just a few picks later, hurts. One pick after this selection, the Jazz selected Keontae George, who had a great rookie year. 3 picks later, the Heat took Jaime Jaquez. The next pick after that was Brandon Podziemski, and then the pick after that was Cam Whitmore. Next is the Boston Celtics, and their biggest regret of the year is making Jaylen Brown the highest paid player in NBA history. Of course, the Celtics have been the best team in the league all season long, and trying to find any regrets for them was incredibly difficult, so I've got to nitpick a little bit here, but ultimately, while Jaylen Brown is obviously a very good player and an all-star talent, it's incredibly hard to justify giving maybe the 20th best player in the NBA the biggest contract that the league has ever seen. Up next is the Brooklyn Nets, and their biggest regret of the season is overvaluing Mikal Bridges as much as they have. When Mikal Bridges first arrived in Brooklyn, he exploded as a scorer, surprising everyone, and as a result of it, the Nets started making it clear that their plan was to build around him. They have, according to several reports, received quite a few trade offers for Bridges in the range of 3 first-round picks plus more for him, and they've turned all of those offers down. However, as the season progressed, Bridges came all the way back down to earth, and the truth of the matter is that he is not an all-star scorer and is realistically a third option on a winning team. They could have traded him for max value when the opportunity was there, but now his value is not as high as it once was. Next is the Charlotte Hornets, and their biggest regret of the season is bringing Miles Bridges back. The entire Miles Bridges situation off the court is difficult to discuss in depth here, but objectively, it's been an unnecessary distraction that the team should have moved on from, because bringing him back was nothing but bad PR without any meaningful payoff, since the team was still one of the worst in the league this year, and now Bridges is about to be a free agent and could leave anyway. Up next is the Chicago Bulls, and their biggest regret of the season is not blowing it up when it became clear that they weren't good enough to compete. The Bulls tried their best to put together a core of talent to make deep playoff runs with, but it just did not work that way. Every single basketball fan knows it, most of their own fans know it, but the front office continually doubles and triples down on the players on this team, who together provide a ceiling no higher than the play-in tournament. Next is the Cleveland Cavaliers, and their biggest regret of the year is ignoring the elephant in the room as long as they have, being the Donovan Mitchell situation. The Cavaliers had another relatively successful season this year, but something's been looming in the background for a while that determines a lot about their future moving forward, being the fact that Donovan Mitchell has just 1 year left on his current contract and has been hesitant to sign a contract extension with the Cavaliers. They needed to figure out whether or not he will be a part of their core for the foreseeable future, but instead, things are still fully up in the air. Next is the Detroit Pistons, and their biggest regret is hiring Monty Williams to be their new head coach. There was a lot that went wrong with the Pistons this year for sure, but Monty's decision-making regarding lineups, minutes, and roles frustrated Pistons fans immensely all year long. Killian Hayes was starting and playing heavy minutes way too long into the season ahead of Jaden Ivey. A lot of the lineups that he ran were starved of spacing, and he just didn't do a very good job putting his young team in positions to succeed. Up next is the Indiana Pacers, and their biggest regret is not finding more minutes in the playoffs for TJ McConnell. McConnell's made a long career out of providing energy off the bench, pestering opposing guards on defense, and knocking down mid-range jumpers, and this year he had the best season of his career. Game after game, he was one of the Pacers' best players on the court in the playoffs too, and while they did well making it to the conference finals, there were definitely times where they should have been playing him more, as he didn't have a single playoff game this year with at least 30 minutes played. Next is the Miami Heat, and their biggest regret of the season is lazily pursuing Damian Lillard in the offseason. All summer last year, Damian Lillard was making it very clear he wanted to go to the Miami Heat, and the Heat definitely had interest in making that happen, but they refused to put together a reasonable offer for him due to the fact that they believed they were bidding against themselves. Well, as we all now know, the Bucks swooped in and got a better offer together for him, and the Heat ended up in the play-in tournament once again this year without him, only this time they lost in the first round of the playoffs. Up next is the Milwaukee Bucks, and their biggest regret of the year is hiring Doc Rivers to be their head coach. The Bucks fired Mike Budenholzer last summer and hired Adrian Griffin in his place at first. There were reports that the team didn't see eye to eye with Griffin on how things should be done, but they were still getting results under Griffin with a record of 30-13. The Bucks still chose to fire him though, and in his place, they brought in maybe the worst option in Doc Rivers, who for a decade now has a reputation of coming up short with stacked rosters, blowing big leads, and blaming everyone but himself for those failures, and immediately the team got worse under Rivers, finishing the season with a record of 17-19, which is a losing record. Next is the New York Knicks, and their biggest regret of the year is overworking their best players in the playoffs. The Knicks made noise this season on the backs of their non-stop work rate on the glass and their dominant defense, and their best players would rarely ever come off the court. That strategy works until it doesn't. Jalen Brunson was playing like 43 minutes or more almost every playoff game, then he got injured. Josh Hart would play all 48 minutes half of their games, then he got injured. OG Anunoby had just come back from an injury before the playoffs began, yet he was still playing 45 minutes in half of their playoff games, then he got re-injured, and those injuries held them back from making their first conference finals appearance since the year 2000. Next is the Orlando Magic, and their biggest regret is how they used both of their lottery picks in the draft. The Magic took huge strides forward as a young team on the rise, but looking back, things could have been even better if they didn't whiff twice in the lottery of last draft. They had 2 picks in the lottery of a relatively strong class, but came away with 2 players that struggled to make any kind of impact for them in Anthony Black and Jet Howard. Up next is the Philadelphia 76ers, and their biggest regret of the year is playing Joel Embiid through injury in January. Joel Embiid was having the best year of his career this season and was the clear-cut favorite for MVP in January, but then he tweaked something in his knee, and it was clear that it was hampering his play. Instead of resting him for a week or 2 at the time, seeing as there was still so much basketball left in the season, they played him through it, putting him at further risk of injury, and that same week against the Warriors, he re-tore his meniscus and missed the next 2 months of the year, which sent the 76ers from the 3 seed down to the play-in tournament. Next is the Toronto Raptors, and their biggest regret is holding on to Gary Trent Jr. as long as they did all season. The Raptors finally shifted towards a rebuild this year, trading away OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam, but with Gary Trent Jr. also hitting free agency this summer, they're now likely going to lose him for nothing in return when they could have easily found a team to trade for him and his shooting talent at the trade deadline. And finally, the last team is the Washington Wizards, and their biggest regret of the year is trading for Jordan Poole. Taking a swing on young, creative scoring talent can sometimes pay off in a big way, but this was not the case here. Out of every starting player with heavy usage in the league, Poole may have been the very worst of the bunch, scoring the ball very inefficiently, playing terrible defense, and just making consistently poor decisions with the ball in his hands all year long. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think the biggest regrets of the year are. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.